As white smoke rises over the Sistine Chapel, the world rejoices. A new pope has been elected. But few people know that the real ritual is just beginning. Behind closed doors, without cameras and applause, the newly elected pontiff receives 7 sacred objects. They are not shown on TV. They are not just symbols. Each of them changes the life of the man who now bears the name of the Pope. In this story, we will tell you about all 7 items, their meaning, and the ancient traditions that are still followed today. Have a nice listen. In a small, guarded room behind the Sistine Chapel, known as the Room of Tears, the new Pope stood alone. Awaiting him were not statesmen, advisors, or clergy, but 7 sacred items. None of them flashy, none of them trivial. Each a message, a reminder. This was no coronation. It was an appointment to carry the weight of 1 billion souls. The first item, the Pallium, a shepherd's burden. Laid across a crimson cushion was a narrow band of white wool, soft to the touch, yet heavy in its implication. It was adorned with 6 small black crosses, its simplicity disarming. This was the Pallium, woven from the wool of lambs blessed on the feast of St. Agnes. It had been crafted by cloistered nuns and carried to Rome with reverence. The Pope lifted it slowly. It was no mere adornment. This band symbolized that he was not just Bishop of Rome, but Shepherd of the Universal Church. Its design was ancient, echoing the early bishops who bore it as a sign of spiritual authority. But its message was timeless. Lead with gentleness, carry the lost, defend the weak. The Pope placed it upon his shoulders and felt the weight of more than wool. He was not being crowned. He was being yoked. The second item, the ring of the Fisherman, a bond with Peter. On a silver tray nearby sat a gold ring, larger than most, with a carved image of St. Peter casting his net from a boat, Annulus Piscataris, the ring of the Fisherman. This ring was ancient in tradition and authority. It symbolized the Pope's direct succession from St. Peter, the first among the apostles, who had been a fisherman before he was a martyr. The new Pope would wear it during official acts of governance. Once it was used to seal papal documents in wax. Now it bore ceremonial significance, but its meaning endured. The Pope was to be a fisher of souls, tasked with casting the net of faith across oceans of doubt. And yet, its permanence was temporary. Each ring is unique, and upon a Pope's death or resignation, it is destroyed, cracked by the Camerlengo, to signify the end of his earthly authority. The Pope slid the ring onto his finger. It was not a trophy, it was a trust. As the doors to the Room of Tears creaked open, a whisper moved through the Vatican corridors. Habemus Papam. And though the world would soon see his white cassock and hear his name, it was this moment, cloaked in sacred silence, surrounded by symbols both humble and eternal, that truly marked the beginning. Now Pope had placed the Pallium on his shoulders, and the ring of the Fisherman upon his hand. But the transformation was not yet complete. The next items would not be spoken into existence. They would be worn. His garments awaited. The third item, the papal vestments, cloaked in humility, hanging carefully on a brass stand, was a collection of sacred clothing, a pure white cassock, a red mozzetta lined with silk, a papal stole adorned with gold embroidery, and red leather papal shoes, hand-stitched in a small Roman workshop. These were not simply religious robes, they were the visual language of the office, a uniform that whispered of history, identity, and purpose. The white cassock, unassuming and plain, had been worn since Pope Pius V, a Dominican who refused to give up his order's white robes. Today it signals purity, transparency, and the universal nature of the papal mission. The mozzetta, though not always used by modern popes, rests on the shoulders like a royal cape, but its red color serves not to elevate, but to remind. Red is the color of blood, of martyrdom, of sacrifice. It whispers of Jesus, crucified on the cross, of countless saints who paid the price for truth. The stole, placed over the neck, echoes the authority of the shepherd. It is used in blessings and sacraments. Gold-threaded, yet delicate, a balance between heaven's glory and human fragility. And the papal shoes, red, like the blood of the martyrs. Once a political color worn by emperors, now transformed into a sign of humility. Even the shoes of the vicar of Christ must walk in the footsteps of those who suffered. As he dressed, Pope Leo XIV looked not at his reflection, but inward. He was not putting on grandeur. He was clothing himself in responsibility. The fourth item, the papal pastoral cross, the shepherd's staff. Near the vestments stood a tall silver cross, simple in form, yet profoundly weighty. This was the papal pastoral cross, a crucifix atop a staff that the Pope would carry during liturgical processions and solemn blessings. Unlike a bishop's crozier, which curves at the top like a shepherd's hook, the Pope's staff remains straight, symbolizing that he is shepherd not only of a flock, but of the shepherds themselves. His authority does not curl inward, but extends outward, steady and unwavering. Pope gripped the cross in silence, and for a brief moment, his thoughts wandered. This wasn't just a prop for ceremony. He would carry it before thousands, and sometimes alone, through joyful Easter masses, through funerals, through war zones and refugee camps, through corridors of power and broken cathedrals, through applause and through silence. This cross, like the one it bore, would be heavy. Now fully vested, with ring, pallium, stole and staff, new Pope stood still. Outside, the crowd chanted his name for the first time, but inside, he was not yet ready. There were 3 more items he must receive. Not all of them could be held in hand, but all of them would mark him forever. The 5th item, official papal documents, authority in ink. Laid neatly on a side table were official papal documents, freshly sealed and awaiting their final touch. These included the papal bull of election, the formal proclamation that confirmed his acceptance of the office, legal decrees that would notify the world's governments and churches, and documents that gave him jurisdiction not just over the Vatican city-state, but over the spiritual governance of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. These were not decorative scrolls. They were living instruments of power. The voice of Peter, now inscribed in modern ink. Their authority would ripple through canon law, diplomacy, liturgy, and conscience. With his signature, Pope would not just speak to the Church, but to nations, to world leaders, to history. His name, once Matteo, was now sealed in red wax. That change, formalized on paper, declared that he was no longer his own. He was now the property of the Church, a servant of the message, a steward of soul. The 6th item, white smoke, fumata bianca, a signal to the world. Though he could not touch it, the world already had. The 6th item, the most iconic and least understood, was not placed in his hands but released into the sky. Fumata bianca, white smoke. That single moment when the chimney of the Sistine Chapel exhales and the world holds its breath. A plume of chalky rising smoke that bridges heaven and earth, ancient tradition and digital immediacy. From Manila to Madrid, from Nairobi to New York, all eyes turned upward to see it. It wasn't just a sign of election. It was a signal that the Church endures, that despite scandal, suffering, politics and time, the world's oldest continual institution still breathes, still hopes, still renews. New Pope had been chosen behind locked doors, but it was the smoke that told the people they were no longer without a shepherd. Smoke fades, but that moment stays. The 7th item, the Papal Tiara, a crown not worn, but felt. In a nearby cabinet, encased in glass, rested the final item, the Papal Tiara, Tiara Papalis, made of precious metals crowned in 3 tiers and adorned with jewels once donated by kings. It had crowned popes for nearly a millennium. The 3 levels traditionally symbolize the Pope as Father of Kings, Governor of the world, Vicar of Christ, on. But in 1963, Pope Paul VI laid down the tiara permanently. Since then, no pope has worn it, and yet it has never left the room. Why? Because its meaning remains. The tiara is not about glory, it's about the burden of leadership. Though it may no longer rest on the Pope's head, its symbolism still rests on his shoulders. It reminds every new pontiff, you hold no sword, you wear no crown, but your authority must reach further and last longer than any empire on earth. Pope approached the glass. He did not touch it. He did not need to. He had already inherited it, not the crown, but the cross. As the final vesting ritual ended, a knock sounded at the door. "It is time, Your Holiness." The Pope took one last breath in silence, then turned. In moments he would walk out onto the balcony. The bells would ring again. The crowd would roar. Cameras would capture the smile. The world would see the robes, the ring. But only he would know the weight of the 7 sacred things now entrusted to him, the things no lens could capture. And in his heart he carried not power but a prayer. "Lord, let me be worthy of what I now carry."